Women or girlies, I'm here to tell you that leaving important financial decisions to your husband is not the slay or the flex that you think it is. I repeat, leaving important financial decisions to your husband is not the flex or the slay that you think it is. Where is this coming from? Within the last 2 months, umenionyesha mambo. And I have stories and maybe receipts. So within the past 2 months, I have had 3 women who bought life insurance covers. So they came to me and they told me that they've seen me talking about the importance of buying a life insurance cover on my platforms, and they have decided that they want to get an insurance cover. So they bought the covers. So later on, they stopped paying for the covers. And by later on, I mean one of the women stopped paying after 3 months. This means that she had paid for her cover for a whole quarter. And the other 2 women stopped paying for their covers after 6 months. Both of them had paid for their covers half yearly. Because when you buy a whole life insurance cover, you don't necessarily have to pay monthly. You can choose to pay in lump sum. So you can pay quarterly, half yearly, and yearly, and you're allowed to pay, for a maximum of 2 years in advance. So the first one after 3 months, and the other 2 6 months later, they were supposed to, the first one was supposed to renew her quarterly payment, and the other 2 were supposed to renew their half yearly payments, but they hadn't renewed. So I reached out to them because I was worried. I was like, so I asked them, why are you not paying for the cover? Why are you late with their payment? And I genuinely thought they would tell me something to do with, I'm sorry, I lost my job, or one of my income streams not doing so well. Those are the kind of responses I expected, so that we can have a conversation about, what you can do about it. So for example, I've talked on this platform where I tell you that one of the best ways that you can think about your life insurance cover is by investing in treasury bonds, or specifically infrastructure bonds, where you offset that obligation. So you buy an infrastructure bond, and then the interest or the coupons that you get from that infrastructure bond, you use it to pay for the premiums of your life insurance cover. So away from that. So as you can see, those are not the responses that I got. The responses that I got were that their husbands did not approve of the decisions. That their husbands did not approve of the decision to take up a life insurance cover. And let me tell you, I've never been so heartbroken. When each of these 3 women came to me for the whole life insurance discovery calls, they told me that the reason why they were buying the life insurance policies is because they wanted to protect their children. These 3 women are mothers. The main reason why they bought these life insurance covers is to protect their kids from their premature death. They wanted to make sure that if God forbid they passed on prematurely, they would be able to leave their children X amount of millions, so that the lives of those children can continue uninterrupted, at least financially. Because we know what happens in a Kenyan society when one parent, especially the main provider, or 2 parents passed on and kids are left. What usually happens that those kids are usually tossed from one home to another. One time they're living with the grandparent, another time an uncle, sometimes a distant relative, sometimes an auntie, and eventually they may end up in a children's home. So for these 3 women to tell me that the reason why they will not continue paying for their life insurance cover is because their husbands did not approve of it, left me shocked, and as I said, disappointed. One of them literally wrote to me and said that my husband did not approve of this decision. And anytime I read that message, I always wonder, what about you honoring your decision? What about you as a woman honoring your ability to make important financial decisions about your life and the life of your children? What about you? What about your brain? What about you participating in important financial decisions in that household? Especially because these women are income earners. They have their own money. They were paying for these covers using their own money. They have jobs. They have income streams. they made the decision because they understood why, or they understood why we need a life insurance cover. And something else that I've been thinking about, you as a wife, and at the same time, you as a mom, don't you understand that the responsibility you have towards your children is a different responsibility that you have towards your husband? The responsibility you have towards your children is the responsibility of a mother. It's the responsibility of a parent. That means you are supposed to do anything possible within your means that you can to protect your children. And that is why you bought that cover. And the responsibility you have towards your husband is very different. Ladies, we've been told over and over again that marrying the wrong man is one of the worst financial decisions that we will ever make. And before I expound this further, let me explain, in case you're new here, let me explain why we buy a whole life insurance cover, or why it is important for you to buy a whole life insurance cover, especially if you're a mother, and it doesn't matter whether your husband approves this decision or not. So, why do we buy a whole life insurance cover? The main reason why we buy a whole life insurance cover, it is to protect our beneficiaries. And who are our beneficiaries? Most of the time, our beneficiaries are our children. Because as I said earlier, if you passed on prematurely, you leave your kids in a very vulnerable situation, without school fees, without clothing, without food, and everything else a child needs in order to develop. That is the primary reason why we buy a whole life insurance cover. And when people come to me for these life insurance discovery calls, one of the assignments I give them is this. Make a list of 5 people who would take care of your family, especially children, especially your children, if you died today. Make a list of 5 people who would take care of your family, especially your children, if you died today. The people on this list should offer the same lifestyle your family or your children are accustomed to. And I always ask people, tell me, give me that list. At the end of this discovery call, give me this list. And of course, a lot of us struggle to come up with a list of people. Think about it. Give me even 1 or 2 people in your life who would be able to offer your children the same lifestyle that they were accustomed to. Even those people who really love us, most of the time they do not have the financial muscle. So as you can see, you buy a whole life insurance cover so that you leave your kids X amount of millions so that their lives can continue uninterrupted, at least financially. So I always tell parents, the way you think about a whole life insurance cover is, if your kids are below the age of 18, you think of that cover as protection. Why? Your kids are minors. If you passed on prematurely, you'd leave them vulnerable. So therefore, that whole life insurance cover is you protecting them from your premature death. But if your kids are above the age of 18, you think of that cover as a liquid inheritance. Because even if your kids, they're above the age of 18, let's say they're in their early 20s, late 20s, 30s, it is still an important cover, because it's good to leave your kids a liquid inheritance. It's good to leave a legacy to your children. Leaving your kids that kind of amount of money, usually in millions, is usually life-changing. It's a life-changing amount of money. So whether your kids are below the age of 18 or they're above the age of 18, it's an important cover for you to have. So that's the primary reason. So, as a practical example, think of a parent who has a 3-year-old child. Because that child is 3, that means they're a minor and they're vulnerable. And so let's say that parent buys a whole life insurance cover that they're going to be paying for the next 15 years. So between now and the next 15 years, that child is still going to be a minor. They're still going to be below the age of 18. So between now and the next 15 years, you as the parent of this 3-year-old, you think of that cover as protection. But after 15 years, what is usually expected is that you stop paying for the cover after 15 years. So after 15 years, this child that we're talking about is now going to be 18. So at that point, when your child is 18, you stop thinking of that cover as protection, and now you start thinking of that cover as a liquid inheritance. So it can serve both purposes depending on how old your children are. And so apart from that, that is the primary reason why we buy a whole life insurance cover. Why else do we buy a whole life insurance cover? Number 1, protecting yourself from critical illnesses. You know what happens in our Kenyan society when someone gets diagnosed with a critical illness such as any type of cancer, kidney failure, they need a major organ transplant, blindness, heart attack, stroke, and nowadays we've seen that even young people are, having strokes. And so what happens at Kenyan society when somebody experiences such a critical illness is that you add random people in a WhatsApp group, people you went to school with, primary school with, like 2 decades ago, and then you want to fundraise. And so instead of that, if you can afford getting a whole life insurance cover, get a whole life insurance cover and add critical illness insurance, so that if God forbid you ever got diagnosed with a critical illness, then the life insurance or the insurance company will pay you X amount of millions. So for example, my life insurance cover has a 5 million critical illness cover. So I could get paid 5 million critical illness cover to seek treatment. So the second thing that you can add to your whole life insurance cover is accidental disability. So any of us can get involved in an accident, and unfortunately, 2 bad things can happen if you got involved in a terrible accident. The first bad thing that can happen is that you end up with a permanent disability. The second bad thing that can happen if you got involved in a bad accident is you die. Let's go back to having a permanent disability. People living with disabilities live different lives from people who do not have disabilities in terms of the amount of care that they need, the amount of hospitals, the amount of times they need to visit the hospital, the amount of equipment they need, such as special beds, such as wheelchairs. Sometimes you even need a 24/7 live-in nurse. So if it happened to you where you ended up with an accidental disability and your life changes overnight, how would you survive? So the reason you add an accidental disability cover to your whole life insurance cover is so that if God forbid you ended up with a permanent disability, again, you're paid X amount of millions, such as 5 million, 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, so that it acts as an income replacement, because now when you have a permanent disability, you cannot continue working. And so it acts as an income replacement so that, you have money, because your life has to move on even if you have a permanent disability. I said the other bad thing that can happen if you got into a bad accident is you die. So if you end up with a permanent disability, it is you who is going to be paid that accidental, in full it's called accidental disability stroke death. So it's you who's going to be paid that amount of money because you're still alive. It's just that you have a disability. But if you died from the accident, it is your children, or rather your beneficiaries, who are going to be paid that accidental death stroke disability money. So as you can see, buying a life insurance cover is important. So now that we are on the same page, you understand why it is important for you to get a whole life insurance cover. I can go back to talking about what we are always advised, that marrying the wrong man is going to be one of the worst financial decisions that you can make. So in this case, these women trusted their own decision-making process at first when they bought the covers, and they even chose to pay for the covers quarterly and half yearly, and later on went to share the good news with their husbands, or went to share the good news of making an important financial decisions, and their husbands decided, I don't want that in my house, I don't want you to make that financial decisions. And the women were like, okay, and they came back. And these are, as I said, these are women who have their own jobs, who have their own money, who are able to pay for their covers. And they decided, okay, my husband has said, and they decided they won't continue paying for these covers. So let's expound on why this is wrong. So back then, when I was in therapy, if you've been part of the Wealth Tribe long enough, you know that I am an advocate for therapy. Like, if you feel the need to see a therapist because you're struggling with your mental health for one reason or the other, please go to therapy. So back then, when I was in therapy, during one of the sessions, my therapist started sharing. So my therapist has one daughter. So she started talking to me about all the plans she has for her daughter. And at that point, I think the daughter was like a 1 year old. And I remember one of the plans that she has is that every holiday, or like once or twice a year, she wants to take her daughter on a trip. It doesn't matter whether it's a local trip or it's an international trip. She wants to expose her daughter to the world through travel. And I remember being so impressed at how she kept going on about how it is her plan for her daughter. And I remember asking her why she kept talking about the fact that those are her plans for her daughter and not her plan with the husband, not their plan for their daughter. And I remember her telling me, those are my plans for my daughter, regardless of whether my husband is going to be on board or not. And remember that she's in a loving and happy marriage. So when I'm talking about these things, don't think I am talking about people who are not in happy marriages. Me, I don't even know whether these three women are in happy marriages. I'm specifically talking about these women not being able to participate in important financial decisions despite being income earners in these families. So back to my therapist, she told me that, yeah, these are my plans for my daughter. Whether my husband is on board with these plans or not, that's up to him. So if he's on board, well and good. If he's not on board, I am still going to make sure that I implement this plan for my daughter. And that moment, that was a light bulb moment about the kind of marriage that I would want to be in matters, making independent decisions and especially making independent financial decisions. And I also remember talking to my therapist about the concept of buying a whole life insurance cover to protect that same daughter. And she was immediately on board. She's like, okay, come. Where do we sign? What kind of insurance do you think I need in terms of like how much money do you think would be enough to protect her if I passed on? What kind of critical illness and accidental disability? What level of insurance do you think I should need? And she signed up, and she never brought up the concept of her husband or whether her husband is going to approve this decision or not. And I remember that was such a profound moment for me, seeing her being that independent with those kinds of decisions. So, ladies, I have a few talking points on this matter. The first thing I said in the beginning is that the responsibility you have towards your children is different. It's a different responsibility that you have towards your husband. So that story about my therapist should teach you what you need to do when it comes to protecting your children or even when it comes to investing on behalf of your children. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that just because he's a man doesn't mean he's good with money. Just because he's a man doesn't mean he's good with money management or has better financial literacy. Financial literacy is not a gender thing. I have been in this financial coaching business long enough for me to be able to tell you that financial literacy is not a gender thing. Financial management is not a gender thing. You actually have to do the work. Whether you're a woman or man, you actually have to do the work to be good at money management. So instead of outsourcing such an important decision from your husband after you already made the decision by yourself because you thought it was a good idea. So instead of outsourcing your financial decisions from your husband, one of the things that you're supposed to be doing as a woman or as a mom and as a wife when you get your own life insurance cover is to go back home and tell your husband to also get a life insurance cover to protect you and the children. Because as I said in one of my previous videos, which I'll share a link to, is that when you get a whole life insurance cover to protect your children and write your children as beneficiaries and also write your husband as the guardian to those children, it means if you passed on prematurely, it is your husband who is going to have access to that X amount of millions. Because your kids are minors, they won't have access to that money. Therefore, your husband also needs to get a life insurance cover of his own so that if God forbid he passed on prematurely before you, if he passed on before you, he is able to leave you X amount of millions so that you're able to take care of those children. Lakini wewe, instead of going home and having that conversation with your husband about how he's also supposed to get that life insurance to protect you and your children so that when he passes on prematurely, and we know statistically that women live longer than men, so when he passes on prematurely, instead of akuache hapo na some side hustles that you're not even used to, because now one of the sources of income from your family is gone. Instead of you talking to him about getting that life insurance cover, you're going to tell him about an important financial decision that you made, and you are allowing him to tell you to stop. Na watoto wako je? Hai. And now to some wisdom that I got from one of my life insurance clients, and because si ati nawatetesha nyinyi wote, some of you women, in fact a majority of you wealth tribers, you're very smart. And so some wisdom I got from one of my clients when we were having that conversation about why it's important for you to get a life insurance cover as a mom. So she taught me this lesson in our mother tongue, which is Kikuyu. I'm going to say the lesson in my mother tongue, and then I'm going to translate. You understand the way some of these life lessons, they slap harder when it is said in your mother tongue. So bear with me. So this is what she told me. Agatha, arũme matireraga ciana. Arũme matireraga ciana, which translates to men do not bring up children. And one of the other things that she went ahead to say is that that man that you're asking permission from to make important financial decisions, that you have the money to fund yourself, that same man, that same man that you have written as a beneficiary or as a guardian of your life insurance cover, he will use, if you passed on before him, he will use the payout of that life insurance cover to get your replacement. He will use the payout of your life insurance cover to remarry. And women, also don't forget that statistically, 65% of men are more likely to get remarried first. All I'm saying, mimi, in a Kenyan context, like we say, I'm not saying that mtoke kwa kinandoa, ama msiolewe, apana. Love is a beautiful thing and companionship is a beautiful thing. My point is, become active participants of important financial decisions in your marriage. That is what I'm saying. And I've explained why. Now, something else that I've just remembered is another lady, when she came to buy a whole life insurance cover, she added a 5 million critical illness cover to her life insurance cover. And I remember at some point after telling me, yeah, I want a 5 million critical illness cover, I remember her being quiet for like 2 minutes and I asked her, you seem worried. What is going on? You won't believe what she told me. She told me that she's just thought about if she ever, God forbid, got diagnosed with cancer, she was worried about how would she explain to her husband where the 5 million came from. And so I looked at her and asked her, let me ask you, so if today you are in a hospital somewhere, you've just been diagnosed with cancer and you've been admitted, you want to tell me the thing you'd be worried about or the thing that would be bothering you the most is, how will I explain to my husband where the 5 million for my treatment came from? Is that the first thing that you would be worried about? Like, is that the first thing that you'd be worried about? Because for me, I would be worried about my recovery, not explaining where the 5 million came. And lastly, as I was having this conversation with a close friend, because I wanted to hear, her opinion about this, she looked at me, and remember, she's also married, by the way, fun enough that this friend is also married. She looked at me and asked me, so the same men who will not take a paternity leave to help you when you're pregnant or when you're a new mom, like their companies, even if it's a 2 weeks paternity leave, their companies allow 2 weeks paternity leave. So the same men who will not take a 2 weeks paternity leave to help you when you're pregnant or when you're a new mom, because they'd rather be stuck at work or they'd rather work than be exposed to their, as she said, freshly postpartum wives. These are the same men that you're asking permission from to protect your children. And most importantly, don't forget that time is a factor. If someone tells you, or if your husband tells you to stop paying for your life insurance cover now, and you stop paying for the cover, what if you guys separate? Let's imagine that you guys are in a very happy marriage for the next 7 years. Then 7 years down the line, you guys separate. And so he goes his own way and you go your own way. And most of the time, it is women who are left with the children. Because mukumbuke, arome matireraga ciana. So you are left with your children. And then you remember the terrible financial decisions that you made because you were not given permission or because you were told to stop. So it's 7 years later. If you were still paying for that cover for 7 years, you'd only be left with like 8 years to finish paying for that cover. But now, 7 years later, you have to start making contributions from scratch. And worse still, life insurance is a factor of age. The older you are, the more expensive it is to insure you. So if you are not given permission by your husband to take this cover at 35 or at 40, I'm quoting these years because these are the ages of the women that I'm talking about. So if you're not given permission at 40 or at 35, 40 plus 7 is 47. You come back and you want to buy a life insurance cover at 47, it is going to be damn expensive. It's going to be more expensive than it was when you were 40. So, to conclude, leaving important financial decisions to your husband is not the slay that you think it is. And by the way, this thing of your financial decisions being approved is not only life insurance thing. I've seen women have come back to me and told me my husband said no, let us not open a money market fund account. He didn't think it's a good idea. My husband told me that instead of us investing in treasury bonds, let us, go buy a piece of land. I'm not saying it is wrong to buy a piece of land. If it is in line with your financial goals as an individual, or if it is in line with your financial goals as a couple. My point here is why you're seeking approval, especially when you have even if you do not have an income, if it is a situation where you are a stay-at-home mom and you take care of that household, that is work. So it's not just because you're bringing an income. Anyway, women, what do you think of this matter?